Ella's heart pounded as she leaned against the cold bathroom sink, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The two pink lines appeared starkly clear, despite her desperate wish for them to vanish. She was 14, a freshman in high school, and the reality of what this meant crashed into her like a tidal wave. Her mind raced, flickering through the possibilities of how her life could change, what people would say, and, most terrifying of all, what her parents would do. The father of her baby was the last person anyone would suspect, and she couldn't even believe it herself. Her teacher, Mr. Lawson. It wasn't like she had intended to become involved with him. Ella was one of the quiet ones at school, more concerned with her grades and books than anything else. She had always been a bit of an outsider, too shy to find her place among the popular crowd, but she didn't mind. School was her escape from the unpredictable nature of her home life. Her father was distant, lost in his work, while her mother was perpetually anxious, her days filled with worries about money and what the neighbors thought. Mr. Lawson had been different. He had a warmth and charm that made her feel seen in a way no one else did. He was in his mid-30s, tall and sharp-jawed, with the kind of presence that drew attention in the classroom. It started innocently. Extra help after school with her history papers, conversations that extended beyond class. He seemed to take a genuine interest in her thoughts, encouraging her to express herself when no one else would listen. It hadn't seemed wrong at the time, and that was the most confusing part. She had developed a crush, sure, but she was just a kid. And yet, Mr. Lawson had allowed their relationship to blur boundaries. He had slowly, skillfully, made her believe it was something more, something meaningful. He gave her attention when she was feeling isolated and lonely, made her feel special, and somewhere along the way, it went too far. Now, standing alone in the school bathroom, Ella realized she had no one to turn to. She was pregnant, and no one could know. If her parents found out, they would blame her for everything. They wouldn't believe that Mr. Lawson had played a role in this. And the school? She wasn't sure if they would believe her either. Mr. Lawson was too well-liked, too well-respected. He had a wife, a perfectly manicured suburban life, and the image of an ideal educator. She was just a 14-year-old girl who had been naive enough to fall for his manipulation. The school bell rang, jarring Ella back to reality. She slipped the test into her backpack and washed her face, trying to compose herself before heading to class. For now, she had to pretend everything was normal, but inside, panic coiled tighter and tighter, threatening to break free. Over the next few weeks, Ella avoided Mr. Lawson as much as possible, not knowing how to approach him or what to say. She felt sick most mornings and spent her free periods in the library trying to avoid her friends. They wouldn't understand, and she feared their judgment. When she passed Mr. Lawson in the hallway, his gaze lingered on her with a question in his eyes, as though he knew something was wrong but wasn't sure what. She shuddered every time their eyes met, wondering how long she could keep the truth hidden. But the clock was ticking, and she knew she couldn't hide her pregnancy forever. Eventually, she had no choice but to confront him. One afternoon, after school, when the halls were empty and the sky outside was beginning to darken, she approached his classroom. Her hands were clammy as she stood in the doorway. He looked up from his desk, surprise crossing his features when he saw her. "Ella, you haven't stayed after for help in a while. Is everything okay?" The familiarity in his voice made her stomach churn. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room felt smaller, the air stifling. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She could see the tension ripple across his face, though he tried to hide it. "Sure. What's going on?" He gestured to the chair in front of his desk, but she remained standing, too nervous to sit. I'm pregnant." The words felt foreign on her tongue, like they belonged to someone else. Mr. Lawson's eyes widened for a split second before his expression hardened into something unreadable. "Ella." His voice dropped and he stood up from his desk, closing the distance between them. "Are you sure?" She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "And it's mine?" The question was laced with disbelief, as if the possibility itself were preposterous. "Yes." The weight of the admission hung between them like a guillotine. He was silent for a long moment, pacing the room as though trying to calculate his next move. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured, careful. "Ella, no one can know about this. Do you understand? If this gets out, it will ruin both of us." Both of us. The word stung, as if she had any choice in this situation, as if this had been her decision. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. She had hoped for some sign of remorse from him, some acknowledgement of the part he had played, but instead, his eyes darted around, calculating the risks. "You have to keep quiet," he said, his voice now sharp and cold. "You can't tell anyone. Not your parents, not your friends, no one. We'll figure something out, but you need to stay calm." She felt sick to her stomach, the weight of his words suffocating her. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought he would care, that he would take responsibility, but instead, he was worried about his own reputation, his own life. She had never felt more alone. Ella left the classroom in a daze, her mind spinning. She had no idea what to do next, but one thing was clear. She couldn't trust Mr. Lawson. As the weeks passed, she withdrew further into herself, her secret growing harder to bear. The pressure of hiding her pregnancy weighed on her every moment of the day. Her body began to change, and she took to wearing baggy clothes to conceal the small but undeniable swell of her stomach. She researched her options late at night when her parents were asleep, and her laptop's glow was the only light in her room. Adoption? Abortion? She didn't know what the right choice was. Every option felt like a dead end, and the isolation was unbearable. One evening, as she sat alone at the dinner table, her mother's voice cut through the silence. "Ella, is something going on with you? You've been acting strange lately. You're not in trouble, are you?" Ella se congeló, su tenedor suspendido en el aire. She couldn't look her mother in the eye, couldn't bear the thought of her finding out the truth. "No, everything's fine," she lied, her voice strained. Her mother narrowed her eyes but didn't press further, though Ella could feel the weight of her suspicion. A few more weeks passed, and as her pregnancy became harder to hide, the fear that someone would find out consumed her. She skipped school as often as she could, but she couldn't avoid it forever. Eventually, she had no choice but to face the growing consequences of her situation. One day, as she sat alone in the library during lunch, her best friend Jenna approached her. Jenna was the only person who had noticed how much Ella had changed over the past few months, and she had grown increasingly concerned. "Ella, what's going on? You've been avoiding me for weeks. You can't keep shutting me out like this." Jenna's voice was full of worry, and Ella felt a pang of guilt. For a moment, Ella hesitated, unsure of whether to finally confide in someone or continue carrying the burden alone. But the weight of her secret had become too much to bear. With a deep breath, she whispered, "I'm pregnant." Jenna's eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God! Ella, how? Who?" Ella bit her lip, her stomach twisting as she tried to summon the courage to tell the truth. But something stopped her. The thought of saying Mr. Lawson's name aloud terrified her. What if Jenna didn't believe her? What if the school didn't believe her? It's complicated," Ella said, her voice barely audible. "But I can't deal with this on my own." Jenna's expression softened, and she reached out to take Ella's hand. "You don't have to. I'm here for you, okay? We'll figure this out together." For the first time in months, Ella felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she didn't have to go through this alone. In the weeks that followed, Jenna helped Ella navigate her options. They visited a clinic together, where Ella learned about the different paths available to her. The decision weighed heavily on her, but with Jenna's support, she felt a little less lost. But as the reality of her situation loomed closer, Ella knew she couldn't keep hiding the truth about Mr. Lawson. He had gotten away with too much already, and she couldn't let him ruin more lives. But the fear of retaliation, the fear of not being believed, gnawed at her constantly. She had no idea how to proceed, how to expose someone so powerful without destroying herself in the process. What if Mr. Lawson turned everything around on her? What if no one believed a 14-year-old girl over a beloved teacher? These thoughts haunted her as each day passed. Then came the breaking point. One evening, after another tense dinner with her parents where her mother had stared at her longer than usual, Ella returned to her room and sat on her bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. She knew she was running out of time. Her belly was growing, her body was changing, and soon there would be no more hiding it. She had to make a choice. The next morning, Ella didn't go to school. Instead, she stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what her life would become if she didn't take action. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she saw a message from Jenna. "Are you okay? I didn't see you in class." Ella stared at the screen, her heart heavy with the decision she had been avoiding for so long. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't live with the lie, the guilt, the suffocating fear that had taken over her life. She texted Jenna back. "I need to tell you the truth about who the father is." A flurry of messages followed, but Ella ignored them, putting her phone on silent. This conversation needed to happen in person. Later that afternoon, she met Jenna at the park near their school, a place where they had spent countless afternoons as kids. But today felt different, heavier. Jenna arrived, her face full of concern as she sat beside Ella on the bench. "So, you're ready to talk?" she asked gently, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ella nodded, her throat tight as she tried to find the words. "It's Mr. Lawson." Jenna's eyes went wide, and for a second she seemed unable to process what she had heard. "Wait, your teacher? Mr. Lawson, are you serious?" Tears welled up in Ella's eyes as she nodded. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't even understand what was happening until it was too late. He made me feel like I was special, like he cared about me. But now, I see. He was just using me." Jenna's face flushed with a mix of shock and fury. "That bastard. How could anyone do that to you? We have to tell someone. He can't get away with this." Ella shook her head quickly, panic rising in her chest. "I can't. No one will believe me. He's a teacher, Jenna. He's married. Who's going to believe a 14-year-old girl over him?" But Jenna was already pulling out her phone. "Number. We have to do something. This isn't just about you, Ella. What if he's done this to other girls? What if he does it again?" Ella felt like she was on the verge of hyperventilating. The idea of coming forward, of exposing everything, terrified her. But Jenna's words echoed in her mind. What if he does it again? She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "Okay," she whispered, "but we have to be smart about this." Together, they devised a plan. Jenna suggested they start by documenting everything. Messages, notes, anything that might prove Ella's story. But that was the problem. There were no texts, no messages. Mr. Lawson had been careful to keep their interactions within the confines of the classroom. The only thing Ella had was her word and the truth she was carrying inside her. But then an idea struck Jenna. What if we recorded him? Like, get him to admit it? If we could get him to say something incriminating, that would be enough to blow this wide open. It was risky, but Ella knew it might be her only chance to expose him. They spent the next few days planning, figuring out how to approach Mr. Lawson without arousing suspicion. Ella estaba aterrada, pero sabía que tenía que ver esto hasta el final. The following week, she returned to school. Her nerves were on edge, but she did her best to act like everything was normal. When she finally approached Mr. Lawson after class, her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to keep calm. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. He gave her a concerned look, as if he had been expecting this. "Of course, Ella. Come inside." Once they were alone in the classroom, Ella could feel the tension between them like a thick fog. She pressed the recording button on her phone, which was hidden in her pocket. I've been thinking a lot about what's happened," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "About the baby." Mr. Lawson's face went pale, but he kept his composure. "Ella, we talked about this. No one can know." "I know," she said, her pulse racing. "But I'm scared. What if someone finds out?" He took a step closer to her, his voice low and urgent. "No one is going to find out. You have to trust me. I told you, I'll take care of this." "Take care of it?" Ella repeated, her voice laced with bitterness. "You mean cover it up?" He looked at her sharply. "You don't understand. This could ruin both of us. I have a family, a career. You have your whole life ahead of you. We can't let this get out." Ella felt a surge of anger rise within her. "This isn't just about you. You're the one who did this to me. You're the one who—" "Ella," he interrupted, his voice full of warning. "We can't go back now. You made your choices too." She stared at him in disbelief. He wasn't even sorry. He didn't care what he had done to her future. In that moment, Ella realized that this man, who had once made her feel important, who had manipulated her into thinking she was special, was a monster. She had the recording. She had everything she needed. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the classroom, leaving Mr. Lawson standing there, confusion and anger brewing on his face. Jenna was waiting for her outside the school gates, her eyes full of anxious hope. "Did you get it?" Ella nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. "Yeah, I got it." The next steps were a blur. Jenna helped Ella bring the recording to the school administration, and soon after it was in the hands of the police. Mr. Lawson was placed on immediate leave while an investigation was launched, and the news spread like wildfire through the school and community. Ella's parents were devastated when they found out, and though the initial reaction was filled with anger and confusion, they eventually rallied around her, offering their support as she navigated the terrifying legal process that followed. Mr. Lawson's reputation crumbled as more information came to light, and soon other girls began to come forward, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior that had gone unchecked for years. In the end, Mr. Lawson was charged with multiple counts of sexual misconduct and abuse of power. His career was over, his family shattered by the revelations. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to harm anyone else. Ella, though forever changed by what she had endured, found a sense of closure in knowing that she had stopped him from hurting anyone else. With Jenna's support, she continued her education and made the difficult decision to place her baby up for adoption, wanting to give the child a chance at a better life than she could provide at such a young age. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with uncertainty, but as Ella stood on the brink of her future, she knew she had taken back her power. She had confronted her abuser, exposed the truth, and in doing so, she had ensured that justice was served.